Tonight, I call upon all of us to set aside our differences, to seek out common ground.
A message of unity from a president considered very divisive. We will take a closer look at U.S. President Donald Trump's State of the Union address. Hello, I'm Anand, Naidoo, and this is The Heat. It was a long address lasting 1 hour and 20 minutes. It was the third longest in the history of the State of the Union speeches. And so, with a lot to discuss, let's get right to our panel. Here with us, Brian Becker, an analyst on U.S. DPRK relations, and he's visited the DPRK on several occasions. From Sacramento, Brian Bosche is an author and political commentator. Also joining us, our correspondent Nathan King, who covered last night's speech, and Lesley Clark is the national correspondent for McClatchy Newspapers. She also joins us right here in our studio in Washington. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Nathan, let me start with you. There we heard it. This was a speech that was being heralded as something that would be big on unity and closing divisions in this country. Did it go any way towards achieving that?
Well, the message would have been fine, but we spent the last year of the Trump presidency seeing division, not just in Washington, but in the country, and you can say largely the world as well, as a result of what Donald Trump has said and done. So the big question is he decided to change the way he does business? So it was a message that fell on deaf ears, if you like, in terms of the Democrats and others. A lot of people calling him the divider-in-chief, if you like. But, you know, the State of the Union is an address you give to the whole American people. People who don't tune into the day-to-day of Washington watch it as well. So if you want to appear presidential and act as united, that's the time to do it.
All right, you say it goes to the whole of the country. President Trump's approval rating is at 37%. It's among the lowest of any president in the modern era. How do you think that speech resonated with the whole country?
Well, CBS did a poll, one of the American networks, and said 75% of people watched it actually thought it was good. But with States of the Union, people who are Republicans watch Republican presidents. People who are Democrats watch Democratic presidents. So the audience is skewed Republican, nearly half. But still, I think even some of Donald Trump's harshest detractors thought he did a good job, a better job than the State of the Union, for his inauguration speech, for example, which talked about American carnage. At least there was some positivity, some looking forward, some sort of coherence as well. But it was a low bar. You know, he hasn't done one in the speeches before. I want to get back to those opinion polls a little bit later in the show. But Lesley, President Trump spent a good deal of time talking about the healthy state of the economy under his stewardship. But detractors would say he was just continuing policies and programs that were put in place by President Obama.
Right. I think you saw that reaction from a lot of the Democrats who were there. They sat on their hands and didn't cheer and were, you know, visibly talking about how that President Obama didn't get any credit for it. But I think the speech went a long way towards speaking to a lot of his Republican critics who have been worried about Trump's Twitter habit, and this spoke a lot to assuage some of their fears that he's too erratic, and I think it went a long way to doing that.
Well, let's bring in Brian Bosche. He's in Sacramento. And Brian, what did you make of the speech, and especially the president's reach out to the Democrats?
I think that the president's speech is, this is the first time that the president became a populist president. He decided last night that he was going to lead Republicans, he was going to lead moderates, and he was also going to lead Democrats. Now, whether Democrats get on board in Congress, I'm not sure he's too concerned about that. But I think he won over the American people last night. He may return to his Twitter habits when he gets back to the White House tomorrow morning. But I think that he truly won over the majority of the American people last night, and the American people are going to give him a chance to lead in a way that he hasn't gotten to lead in year 2 of his presidency. When you say he won over a lot of the American people, does that include Democrats? That does include Democrats. I think it includes moderate Democrats. I don't think it includes those on the progressive hard left that are never going to like this president, no matter how good the economy does under his leadership. But I do believe it includes middle-of-the-road, moderate Democrats, in addition to those that are in the middle, on the fence, who have probably wondered, okay, does this guy really have the leadership tact that he says he does? Yes, it includes Democrats.
Brian, I want to look at one big foreign policy issue that was addressed in this speech, and that is the nuclear program in the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The president adopted a very hardline position on that. Let's take a listen to what he said.
North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear missiles could very soon threaten our homeland. We are waging a campaign of maximum pressure to prevent that from ever happening. Past experience has taught us that complacency and concessions only invite aggression and provocation.
So, Brian, what did you make of that? In a worst-case scenario, was the president softening up public opinion, therefore possibly another war?
Well, there's a section of the Trump administration cabinet that offers the bloody nose alternative that they can carry out some sort of limited surgical strike against some North Korean facilities without it expanding to a regional war or even a global war. I think that's complete nonsense. The stakes are so high, tens of millions minimally would die if they were wrong, maybe hundreds of millions. But yes, what Donald Trump is trying to do is prepare the American people for war. That is war talk. That's softening up the population for the eventuality. He's talking about North Korea's reckless nuclear program. Well, really? North Korea has a military budget the size of the New York City Police Department budget. It has 6 nuclear weapons. The U.S. has 5,000 operational nuclear weapons. The U.S. is carrying out, along with South Korea on a biannual basis, war exercises that simulate the destruction of North Korea, and he says from the podium of the UN General Assembly that he's prepared to annihilate the country. What's reckless? I mean, if you're North Korean or if you're anybody who's being somewhat objective, you'd say, this president is being reckless. Why is he talking like that? He's saying, well, complacency and appeasement in the past, as if Obama was appeasing the North Koreans or George W. Bush, that's a failed policy. That would suggest that we have to go from diplomacy to military confrontation. The American people don't want another war, certainly.
Can I just add one thing? You saw in the First Lady's box last night a defector from North Korea, and the talking between the president and him and his story was a sort of a way of preparing American public opinion for some sort of just war by singling out the suffering that people go through in the DPRK. It was very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And one thing, according to Donald Trump's travel ban, that defector wouldn't actually be eligible to come to the United States because North Korea was part of the travel ban.
That's right. Let me ask Brian Bosche for his response. What did you make of that small part of the speech that addressed the nuclear issue, Brian?
I liked that part of the speech because if you look at the past administrations, President Obama, President George W. Bush, President Clinton, so far, North Korea has not been slowed in their pursuit of nuclear weapons. The past administrations have not gotten the job done. And yeah, maybe they've got 5, maybe they've got 6 operational, but it only takes 1 to plunge the world into war. I think what the president was getting at last night was increasing our deterrent effect so that North Korea knows if you take the wrong step, the world is not going to accept that outcome. Appeasement hasn't worked. It hasn't slowed down their pursuit of nuclear weapons. It hasn't stopped the nation, the rogue nation, from producing more. I think that this president has said, don't you dare test this line in the sand, because we will put a stop to it.
Lesley, here we have the United States calling for countries like the DPRK to dismantle their nuclear program, but at the same time, in the very same speech, he talked about modernizing the U.S. nuclear arsenal, asking for, trillions of dollars, billions of dollars to modernize that arsenal. And to be fair, that effort to modernize the nuclear arsenal was actually started by, again, President Obama.
Right. Right. And it's popular with a lot of the defense hawks who want to see more money into the military and have been pushing the administration and Congress to get defense spending on a, faster, quicker pace. Yeah.
I want you to take a listen to what he had to say about that. Let's watch this.
We must modernize and rebuild our nuclear arsenal, hopefully never having to use it, but making it so strong and so powerful that it will deter any acts of aggression by any other nation or anyone else.
And that goes to the point, Lesley, that Brian Bosche was making. But how and why did nuclear weapons get into the speech? Is that something that we normally find in a State of the Union speech?
Well, I think you generally do. In a State of the Union speech, they want to go through their priorities, and they want to go through what they want to get done with Congress, what they see might happen, and what might not happen as well, to kind of prod Congress. I mean, that's generally, you've got all of them sitting there, and you want to tell them what you want to get done and what your expectations are for Congress.
Yeah. Brian Bosche, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, what I wanted to say is that I think he was also sending a message to North Korea. You know that the North Korean regime was watching this speech, and I think he wanted to remind them in one of the most televised speeches of each year of his presidency that he's serious about this,
right.
That he really means what he says in terms of strength.
Okay, Brian Becker, you've covered the DPRK extensively. You've visited several times. How would they be looking at this?
North Korea, by the way, for Brian's benefit, will not be trembling. They'll not have seen the speech and say, oh my goodness. I mean, North Korea lost 3 million people during the Korean War. They had abandoned their nuclear weapons program until George W. Bush announced that they were part of the axis of evil along with Iran and Iraq. And clearly Bush was preparing to invade Iraq, which he did do, and the head of state there, Saddam Hussein, was executed afterwards. It was at that time that North Korea left the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they said, as they have the legal right to do, that for pursuit of their own national interests, they would pursue nuclear weapons. That's where things froze. Now, right now, that message, the message about improving and modernizing the nuclear weapons of America, the U.S. has already spent $9 trillion on nuclear weapons and has 5,000 operational nuclear weapons. That wasn't for North Korea. That was for China. That was for Russia. Yes. North Korea doesn't need any more convincing about this. This was the going back to the Cold War mentality and saying it will be our unmatched power, meaning supremacy, military superiority. That's for Russia and China, because North Korea doesn't believe that it has parity with the United States.
Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. That paragraph where he talked about China and Russia being rivals and lumping them in with sort of terrorist groups as well in the same paragraph basically set that up. And it's part of this new national security strategy, isn't it? Where it's great power competition all over again. And the nuclear strategy is part of this. This is a president who said we need more nukes, not less, campaigning. And also, I think it's the first president in certainly my working life that is actually quite prepared to think about using them tactically on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm. Didn't Dick Cheney consider using weapons tactically?
But he wasn't president.
But the modernization is designed to make nuclear weapons more usable. The adjustable yields, smaller yields. In other words, the U.S. military doctrine has evolved into attempting to use nuclear weapons in battlefield situations so that there would not be mutually assured destruction as existed during the Cold War. That's what we're looking at.
To be fair, Russia's nuclear doctrine has changed a little bit too.
It has.
Okay, let me move on to something else that was in the speech, and that is the president saying, Brian Bosche, that Guantanamo Bay will remain open. Or shall I say the prison at Guantanamo Bay will remain open. Let's listen to what he said about that.
I just signed, prior to walking in, an order directing Secretary Mattis to re-examine our military detention policy and to keep open the detention facilities in Guantanamo Bay.
So, Brian Bosche, here we have a prison which at one time held about 800 prisoners. There are now just over 50 in this prison. And we've heard over the years of the damage that this prison has done to America's image around the world and the fact that it might act as a recruitment tool for groups like Al-Qaeda. What do you make of the president's decision?
Well, first of all, I don't think that Al-Qaeda or ISIS needs any excuse to recruit more recruits to their efforts. Their drive is to create a caliphate. That is their main recruitment tool. And if you look at things like Guantanamo Bay, the reason we need to keep Guantanamo Bay open is because we don't need to bring these terrorist thugs to our shore. We do not need to put them in the middle of our cities, in the middle of our justice system, giving them rights they frankly do not deserve, carrying out the gruesome attacks they carry out in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, and here in the United States. They don't deserve that kind of respect. They're not American citizens. They don't deserve that right. They should be held off-site at Guantanamo Bay. I do believe that the president, in his disagreement with President Obama, should keep Guantanamo Bay open. I think this is a very wise choice.
Lesley, is there support among most Americans to keep this prison open?
I mean, that's a promise that President Obama, when he arrived in office on the first day, said that he was going to close Guantanamo. And he had a lot of support for it among his base, but he was never able to do it. I mean, I don't think that there is the support in Congress for it. And I think, I mean, I haven't seen any recent polls on it of the American public on it, but given congressional support is definitely there to keep it open.
Nathan, was the president here talking to his base?
Yeah, I think so. On Gitmo, he was. Look, I've covered Gitmo. I've been to Gitmo. It's the weirdest place on earth. I mean, in terms of a prison, it's just totally ridiculous. You have a military structure with some sort of civilian structure trying to work it out. And to the point just made by our other guest, I've covered trials in New York of the East Africa bombing al-Qaeda suspects. They were tried and put away very quickly. We have Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and everyone, the masterminds of 9/11, still awaiting trial, still victims awaiting justice. This system is on slow-mo. They don't know how it is. They're kind of making it up as they go along. And it really isn't serving victims and others well. And there are no convictions, major convictions as yet. In the federal court system, especially in the Southern District of New York, they know how to try terrorism cases. They did it when they tried to blow up the World Trade Center in 1993. They've done it with the East Africa bombings. They keep on doing it with Somalian pirates. And the justice is swift and professional.
And there's a different justice system that's used for the prisoners on Guantanamo Bay, isn't
Absolutely, because under the enemy combatant ruling, you don't have, they set up military courts rather than civilian courts. And that was the only reason, because they thought they were going to get a lot of intelligence from those suspects in the global war on terror.
It's a torture center. It's been recognized as a torture center by the United Nations. How many convictions have there been of those 800 people? That would be 7. Many of those people were picked up because their neighbor said, if they had a feud with the neighbor and there was a bounty by the Americans, hey, yeah, my friend was a driver for al-Qaeda. Many of these men are innocent. Many have been returned. Many are there and they've been already determined to be released because they're not guilty or that they are safe, but they're not being let go. This Guantanamo equals Muslim in Donald Trump's rhetoric. And that's what this is all about, really.
And it's not unpopular with al-Qaeda because it's a great recruiting tool. It's unpopular with America's allies. France, Germany, the UK, they all want this closed down. It's a stain on the American character.
Brian, I want to stay with you for the next thing, and that is the poll that Nathan spoke about earlier in the show. CBS News poll showing that 3 out of 4 people polled approved of the speech. There was a CNN poll that was done, and it showed that 48% of those polled had a very positive response to the address, 22% somewhat positive. Do those numbers surprise you?
Donald Trump is the beneficiary of very low expectations. I mean, if he gives a normal speech, if he can stick with the teleprompter, people consider that to be a good sign. I mean, that's a pretty low bar. But let's look at the numbers. You cited 37% approve of Donald Trump. Let's say it goes to 42% as a consequence of him getting a bounce from this speech. Here you have an economy that's expanding, the stock market's at an all-time high, unemployment's at a low for 20 years, and the President of the United States, who should be able to usher in and take credit for this, has an approval rating of 37%. That shows that Donald Trump has been a catastrophic, dismal failure as a politician.